Well, we're on another episode of Real Talk. We're on YouTube now. Not just Real Talk, but all of Wicked Tuna. You can watch it all now on YouTube. You should go back and do that. If you've never done it before, you have to go watch these episodes and watch all the way through. At the heart of it is these two guys, the Daves.com and Marciano, and their boats are right. I mean, they're the only two captains who make it all the way from episode 1-1 all the way through the very end of the show. And it's pretty cool. So this is episode 9. This is post-breakup. Dave and Paul, the great marriage has come to an end. And we're learning what Paul is like on his own, except he's not on his own yet. He has a little stop before he goes out on his own. He gets picked up by another boat. How do you feel about that?
Hey, you know, I didn't want to let Paul go, but I had to do what was best for the boat. As hard as it was, I know we're friends, but sometimes it's difficult to mix a friendship up with business. And again, I had to do what was best for Sandra and I, the boat as a whole, making money. And Paul was bringing the morale down on the boat.
And we've covered that part of it in the last episode, and you and Paul, and we've kind of gone through it. Yep. But now you got to see him. He didn't go just become another captain. He didn't just decide to take a couple weeks off and go on vacation or whatever it is Paul does. He's right back out there with Monty, with Bill. Did that surprise you at all to see him immediately back, and not even just on another boat in the Wicked Tuna show?
Hey, look, I don't want to see bad for anybody. Paul, even though we did make the split, we're still friends. Mm-hmm. I want to see him successful, but Paul definitely wanted to get on another boat ASAP. And he wanted to do it with the Wicked Tuna boat, just so he could be competitive with me. And he was.
Well, you say you're still friends, and obviously you are. And now here 100%. We are over a decade later, and that's part of the story is that you guys are neighbors, you guys are friends, mm-hmm. You're able to talk and see each other all the time. Somehow you go on vacation with him, which to me is, I'm just incredibly impressed by your patience level.
he's tuned it down a little bit. He's tuned it down.
All right, but you didn't know that then. I mean, in this episode, I think I could quote you. You say, hopefully we can be friends. At one point, you say he's dead to me. So in that moment, you didn't know that you were going to be friends. You know that now. Mm-hmm. Can you remember back how you felt then seeing him on another boat?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. Again, I want to see him be successful. But now that he's on that other boat, what everybody wants to see on the show, from the viewer standpoint, is they want to see Paul catch fish, and a lot of fish, and big fish to take me down a notch.
Mm-hmm. And what did we learn through all this? There's only enough room for one egomaniac on any given vessel.
Well, Sandra managed to stay, so maybe we'll address that a little bit later.
Sandra's different story.
Yes. Very, very different. Did you feel at all that Bill stole him?
No, I don't think so. I got to give Bill respect, because if I remember correctly, we didn't watch it on the episode, but it was there somewhere. Before Bill took him on, Bill came all the way down to the dock and found me on my boat. And he said he wanted to take Paul on, but he asked for my permission if I was okay with that. Total respect to Bill. And of course, I said, absolutely.
That's pretty, hold on, that's important context. I kind of wish we had seen that, because that is very different. And that kind of makes me feel a bit differently about Bill. Like, that's a pretty respectful thing
100%.
To do.
Yeah, I mean, that meant a lot to me. He could have just did it behind my back. I didn't expect him to come up to me and ask me, but he went up a notch in my book.
Did he ask any questions about how to manage Paul?
No, he didn't. I mean, he didn't know. Bill didn't know what Paul was like on my boat. Nobody knows.
Yeah. Poor Billy. He's got nothing but the dirty end of the stick this whole season.
Well, it feels like, again, you said Paul's kind of calmed down, which is great.
Yes.
But at that point,
no,
he was not.
No.
And so I have to imagine Monty must have expected something. Like, this guy's been kicked off this boat and talking to Paul for 5 minutes in 2011 or 12, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to know what you're dealing with.
It's a handful. But, Billy, he stayed on Billy's boat for a short time. Then he went to another boat and another boat. The chain of events continue. There was a trend there.
You tell Sandro in this episode. Well, before we get to that, let me get to you, Marciano, because you watch all this happen now. Kind of knowing what you know and from your perspective, what do you think happened first with the breakup and then with Paul deciding to go hook up with Monty?
Look, the breakup, I understand. I've had a crewman the same way. Guy I'd known since high school, been on the boat with me for almost 4 decades, right? When we were like this. But over those decades, he quit half a dozen times, and I fired him probably half a dozen times, right? Because again, when you're in this context, the way we work, you're spending more time in the boat with that person you're working with when you do your family, right? Even if you had a family. And that's not a slight, Dave.
No, yeah.
You know what I mean? You're in close quarters, extreme situations with a long time with, guys you love. And
It
you
can be
even fight
difficult.
with the guys you love, all right?
Yeah.
Let's face it, we all do.
But just from your perspective, what did you see?
I saw that happening. Something similar that happened to me and my buddy Steve, and you know what I mean? Like I understand that part. But then what did surprise me, I think, was how quickly he just jumped on Monty's boat. But again, like we saw it, Monty's out investigating at the tackle store, trying to find out what Dave's using, where Dave's fishing.
Makes perfect
from the
sense.
tackle
Makes
store,
perfect
right?
sense.
So now Monty has a chance,
The golden opportunity.
right? To not only does he get
Right.
in, right? Okay, I'm going to get Paul, Dave's golden child, right? And then he's gonna know what Dave's rigging, know where Dave's fishing, as well as yes, Paul's a good fisherman in his own right,
But he didn't know
again,
what he
we've
was
seen-
getting into.
Right?
Monty didn't.
Yeah.
I don't.
He
Paul
knew
might
what he
not
was
have
getting
either.
into fishing-wise, but he
It
didn't know
wouldn't
what he was
put it
getting into
past
personality-wise.
If it wouldn't put it past me if this wasn't a setup, all created by this one.
A mastermind.
Again, a no-win for the doctor.
That
Nothing
wouldn't
you can do.
surprise.
Nothing I do.
That wouldn't surprise
Yeah.
me in the least.
Right. So it's you bring up the I forgot about that, about Monty going to the workers and the tackle store and asking them. You weren't here because we talked
Yeah.
about that at that episode.
I remember
you weren't in. How did you feel about that when you see that? Like, wait a minute, this guy is going and like he's essentially like private investigating what it is you're up to.
When you're doing stuff like that, you're desperate. You're not confident in what you're doing, and you're trying to figure out what others are doing. And I actually, that day, I got a call from the owner of the tackle store to tell me what had transpired there.
Really?
With Billy coming in there and asking questions about what I was purchasing,
Yeah.
hooks, line, and all
Yeah.
that. I get it. Desperate times, desperate measures.
Have you ever been desperate like that?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
So you've
But
asked some of those same questions.
When I was desperate like that, I didn't ask the questions. I went out on my own and did more trial and error. I knew I had to change what I was doing. What I was doing then when I wasn't successful was not working, and I had to figure out what was successful.
Yeah, so almost trying to outwork the problem as
Correct.
opposed to
Just being a go-getter, just making something happen out of nothing. Just I had to figure it out.
Right.
When I was a kid, growing up tuna fishing, I didn't catch a lot of fish, not at all. I didn't have anybody to help me. I kind of did it on my own, and for years I went unsuccessful. I wasn't in the tackle stores. I wasn't sitting there spying with binoculars. I did it on my own, and it took a long time to figure it out.
I mean, that's a good point because we've talked about your dad in previous episodes.
My dad wasn't a tuna fisher.
Neither of you guys had your dad teach you how to
No.
tuna fish. Your dad at least fished a little bit.com, but he didn't teach you how to do this.
No, but he taught me the basics.
Who did?
I did.
So you just bought a boat and you're like, screw it, I'm going to go figure this out myself.
Yes.
Nobody helped you. You
No,
weren't a
nobody helped
deckhand.
me.
You didn't do any of that.
It took me a long time, though. I was unsuccessful, and I was in the red for many years.
Yeah.
Until I started getting better.
You touched on it earlier, though, Dave. There's things when this all started. For that very reason, I learned what I know. Nobody held my hand. Nobody
Right.
said, Dave, this is how you do it. I went out there spending thousands of hours on the boat,
Same thing.
trying this and trying that, figuring out what works. And I have the way I rig my baits that I learned. And Dave, even though I may not catch as much fishing with him as frequently, he probably would like to know a few things I would do. Just sure, I'd love to be a fly on the wall, looking over on Dave's shoulder someday, watching him rig a bait. Now, we've come to the point, I'm sure if I told Dave, hey, show me how to rig your bait, and I'll show you how to rig a bait, we would probably show each other almost in entirety of what we're doing.
I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Well, that sort of thing. It's a fisherman thing. You have to understand.
It's a something kind of thing, that's for sure. I don't know. I've heard that phrase in other
But no,
capacities.
look, he's right though. We learned what we learned. But now Here's where we get into dangerous territory, right? With the advent of things like YouTube and everything else.
Very evil unless you're watching the show.
Right? No, I hate to say it, but YouTube, not only that though, but social media, let's call it,
Sure.
in general, and the sportsman shows, right? It's funny because I'm sure you see the same thing I see.
Oh, yeah.
All the things that we coveted as secrets and took a long time to learn, you just hit the old Google bar.
Yep, the
And
internet.
you're going to get in, and there is no secrets anymore.
No.
There is none whatsoever.
The internet changed fishing
Yes.
forever.
Absolutely.
In many ways.
And I would argue far much more so. We get blamed all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Oh,
people
yeah.
see
It's
two
on
extra
TV.
fishermen out there, right? And the thing is, the guys complaining about that weren't fishing in the 80s.
Yeah.
Statistically, you can look up the permits in the 80s. There was 500 boat fleets on Middle Bank. Now these guys start squealing.
Even
if
at
they see
us because we
150,
ruined the
200
fishery.
boat.
Because
Right,
now,
right.
because of wicked tuna, there's twice as many boats
But
out there.
in the 80s, it was
Not
three
true.
times the boats, and there was no wicked tuna.
Well, at some point, maybe
And no internet.
Yeah. At some point, we'll figure out who has the bigger bait and tackle. I don't
Right,
know.
right,
See if
okay.
we can get to the bottom of the question on everybody's
Right.
mind today. In this, the bounty hunter with Paul does catch a fish, though, essentially right in front of you.
He does.
You don't get a fish in this. This might be the
We
only
don't.
episode in all of Wicked Tuna where Dave doesn't catch a fish. But of course, it was this episode and this week. Do you remember how you felt seeing Paul catch a fish?
I got to admit, it was pretty difficult to watch that. And it was pretty difficult to watch it on the episode.
Even now?
Yeah.
Even now,
Years later.
Years later, it's still difficult for you.
I mean, Paul put me in my place right there.
Did he?
Yeah. It was tough. I mean, I'll get by. I'll be okay. There's going to be no eye twitch.
Well, it was twitching.
It was.
It was twitching. Roll the tape. It was twitching.
It was tough to watch. It was, it was tough to watch it
Look,
in
there it
real.
goes again. There it
And
goes
it
again.
was tough to watch it here again.
Well, I wonder then, is that part of, do you think, is that part of why the next day you go
Had to
out
drive.
with Sandro and you let him drive and you say, hey, I've never let anybody do this in 12 years with Paul. And I think it was probably even longer than that he'd been with you.
Yeah, Paul
You
was-
never let him drive the boat out like that. Were you just that kind of thrown off by what had happened the day before?
Yeah, it was a lot, just to have him go and then find out the next day. Billy came over that he was going with Billy, and he went out and he was successful, and we weren't. But that gave me the drive to go out, continue, and be successful, and we were.
So you've told us in a previous episode of Real Talk just how close you and Sandro became, and to the point where, I mean, you almost see him as a son, and he's in your will to take over the boat one day should anything happen to you. I mean, there's some real affection and love and trust between you. Do you think it started that day?
No, Sandro, even before Paul came, Sandro was with me for quite a while.
Okay.
Sandro, Sandro gave me a lot in all the years he's been with me, and he still is with me. And I felt like because he's earned my trust, I've earned his trust. And, long ago, Sandro was captaining the .com. I gave him the shot, and he did really, really well. And I don't say that. There's not a lot of people that I would let take out my boat. Like, I didn't let Paul take my boat. Never did. And he was with me for 20 years. What? What do you...
Do I got to say it out loud?
What?
Would you let me take out your boat?
If you kept it clean. So no.
Did I
Moving
smoke
on.
in there? Did I smoke in there?
I could just imagine .com getting back to his boat
Oh, my God.
with all of the Clorox wipes,
Oh, my
wiping
God.
everything down, making sure it was all clean.
Fingerprints
boat-
everywhere.
His boat is like, I'm sorry, no disrespect, but trash all
Yeah,
over.
but
Hold on.
my fans are watching, Dave.
they are.
Remember when you get there? I don't have to worry about retaliation.
I came down to visit him once, years ago, and I was knocking on the window. He wasn't around. And I see him come up out of the engine room, and he's covered in grease, just all over his arms. I'm like, what are you doing, an oil change? He goes, nope, just changing a light bulb. That's how dirty it was down there.
What had, sort of last thing on this, what had Sandro done to that point, if you can remember back, to earn your trust? Or was it just that you were just so mad at Paul that you're going to let Sandro drive the boat?
No, Sandro's
What
just-
had he done to earn your trust even before that moment?
He had integrity. He always listened, always showed up on time, always showed the the will to learn and to learn more. And he took what he learned and he expanded with it. You know, if I did it this way, he somehow made it better. You know, he just showed me that he loved to do what he loved to do, and that's fish. And he earned my trust with regards to safety. You know, you don't see it on the show, but whenever we're out fishing, he's always scanning the horizon, especially like in the fog. We're watching the electronics, just watching for other boats, ships coming down on us, other boats getting too close. He showed the safety factor, and that to me was the most important. Without safety, you have nothing else, and he just showed that to me.
Yeah, we're going to get even more into that in the next episode, which will be interesting because there's some good safety questions about solo fishing. So that's kind of to come in episode 10. There's a lot of drama in this episode, not just you and Paul, but you also get what's going on as the breakup is occurring on the Odyssey with Ralph and with Pirate, which maybe was to be expected, kind of given some of the personalities involved there. How much drama tends to, I mean, maybe that's why Wicked Tuna started to begin with, but how much drama is there generally on a boat?
It depends on what boat you're on.
Right.
Depends.
None of us want drama.
No.
And that's why Dave, right, I suspect, ultimately had to let Paul go. We could all deal with it a little bit. Look, even we all have bad days at work, right? We all have days you don't want to be at work. We're no different than you or anybody else out there listening, right? But being able to leave those days, leave that ashore, and when it comes to the boat, you just want to go. Everybody wants to just go get the job done.
And have fun.
There ain't no room for drama on the boat. Now, sure, you can have an incident. It happens.
Here
We're all
and there.
human, right? Here and there. But when it's constant, we all have I'm done with it.
Breaking point.
Right? We all have done with it. And look, just like, same reason I don't like computers, right? The first time it would freeze on me if I was trying to use it on the boat, I'd wind up tossing it over the side.
Yeah.
And it was, in Dave's mind, it was time to toss Paul.
In your experience, which has led to more breakups on boats? Is it incompetence or is it annoyingness? I mean, essentially like an inability to just be out there together.
Personalities.
It's more that than incompetence.
Absolutely.
Personality.
Look, anybody can be taught. And you can find a place for anybody on the boat. If for those guys who may not be a captain, if guys have a desire to be there and a desire to be part of the team, you can find a place for them. You can find a job for them. I always thought, when I saw Pirate get off the Odyssey, I would have loved to have seen him. I would have put him on my boat in a minute if he didn't live down in Provincetown, literally 100 miles away by car.
Just because he's a good dude.
Yeah, I would have said, Pirate, come with me. We'll have some fun.
Right.
Because we could have had fun fishing with that guy.
So the fact that he's got tangled lines and all that, you worked through that.
I could have taught him how to not tangle lines.
Right.
I saw what Ralph was doing. Look, if you ask my book, the way Ralph was rigging his lines is a googan maneuver. Any idiot doing it that way deserves the tangle he's getting. Okay? If you haven't figured out how to fish without tangles, look, if the student is incompetent, it's because of the teacher. Can't always blame the student.
What did Pirate do wrong? I mean,
Nothing.
just watching it again, he didn't do anything wrong. I mean, that
He
feels...
didn't do nothing
Come on,
wrong.
he must have done something wrong.
Not everything was
That's
right
not
there.
fair.
Not
He
everything.
didn't do anything wrong.
Some stuff. I mean,
You didn't do
I do
anything
things
wrong.
wrong. Sandra
I didn't
does
do
things-
anything
Paul
wrong.
does things wrong. It's okay to make mistakes on the boat,
Right.
where you may not be up to par with Ralph, but there are certain things there that losing baits, pulling up the line, getting the down rod, little things like that. But obviously, that could have been fixed.
Of course he could have.
Could have been fixed.
And ultimately, it comes down to the captain, right?
Correct.
It's their responsibility.
Correct.
They're the...
He's a teacher.
They got the name on the boat, right?
He's a teacher.
Yeah.
And that's not why I let Paul go, for being incompetent on the boat. It was
Right.
the personality thing. It's
He was annoying as
yeah, but not all the time. When Paul was on, he was on. It was fun. But I got to look at the big picture. Whenever he got into those moves, sorry, say it, but it brings the crew down. And when the morale is down, Dave will agree, you don't catch fish.
And look, and again, I still think that stems from you and Paul being friends for so long. Right? Because I had the same issues with Steven. Right?
I remember you.
Again,
We were just talking about
He fished
this.
with me since high school, right? And again, he quit half a dozen times over the years. and I fired him probably half a dozen, but he was always that guy, and I'm sure you'll agree, to this day, right? If you call Paul and say,
Right.
I need a hand,
Right there.
there won't be any hesitation. He'll be down that boat in a New York minute.
So listening to you say that and thinking about your friend Steve and thinking about Paul and those breakups and then kind of putting that together with the success you've had with your kid, with Joe and with Jay, and Dave, the success that you've had with Sandro over the years, do you think the power dynamic is just too hard for two people who see themselves as peers? Like one person's got to be in charge.
Correct.
And if it's your peer, it's a lot harder than if it's a person who's 10, 15, 20, 30 years younger than you.
But that is
Or
true.
inexperienced.
That is true. Paul and I were on the same level fishing-wise.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Paul has to learn that I'm the owner and the captain of the boat. So I'm just one notch above him. You got to accept that. And I always told Paul and Sandro, look, I don't want you guys to work for me. I want you to work with me. While I was getting the work with me part with Sandro, at times Paul would not work with me and he would work against me. And that's when I had to let him go. And that was evident when you see him go with Billy, you could see the other side of Paul working against the morale on the boat there, for quite a while until they caught the fish.
How long do you think you and I could fish together, Dave? If they, let's say they do a new season. Let's say they do a new season and YouTube throws down and they put me and you in the same boat.
I think it would go okay for a while. The Oscar and Felix thing may come into play a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 trips.
Whose boat?
Oh, it would definitely be my boat. No, actually, it would be your boat. I don't want him on my boat.
Not unless you allow smoking on your boat.
So you'd let him be the captain?
I didn't say that.
No,
It's his boat.
It doesn't matter. But we're going to fish together.
Because I kind of want to put this together now. This is now like a thing. We got to get the producers,
people
get
would
everybody
watch that.
involved. I would watch that.
I would watch that.
But maybe here's what you would have to do.
We may need impartial turf. We may need a donation vessel.
Or just do it on both.
I'll do it on both.
You do one on the .com, do one on the hard merchandise.
That would be fun.
I could be neat for one trip here and there.
Do you think you would last for one trip, being neat? You couldn't smoke either if you were on my boat.
I can smoke on the back deck, just not inside.
On the roof.
On the roof, fine, on the roof. They tell me at the airport I can smoke out on the wing on the plane. So I just haven't had to figure out how to get a lighter that will light it for me out there yet.
You need a really good Zippo. For that.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
We also see kind of a weird dynamic, I think anyway, that kind of goes untalked about. Once Paul joins the bounty hunter, Scott's there too, and he's the first mate on that boat.
It's an odd situation.
And by the way, he's a bit of a hothead himself, right? I mean, like he's got a little aggro to him. Maybe there's some Scott meltdowns, like the Marciano meltdowns. He's not as big a character on the show, so you don't get as much of it. How do you think he took that?
I think it's pretty hard. He was worried about his job.
Of course he was. That's human nature.
As much as Scott wanted to catch, he really didn't want to catch. If they continue catching, Scott's probably going to get the boot.
Well, yeah, and then you wonder, maybe this happens. Maybe a 3-man boat is hard because those 2 non-captains, maybe one's a deckhand, maybe one's a first mate, but is there always a little bit of competition and conflict there where you worry that one would sabotage the other?
Yeah, they're both competing for that top spot to run the boat.
Is 2 easier than 3?
Fishing wise, yeah, I'm going to say there's pros and cons to it. With 2 guys on the boat or 3 guys total, it makes it easier for watches.
It all comes down to
duties.
personalities, right? And again, duration. What's funny is with like Joe and Jay, we were in this unique situation towards the later ends of the seasons we produced, right? With Joe and Jay, we're used to running one boat and I had another boat. Now, in TV world, the viewers didn't know nothing about it. Our story was always, it's Captain Dave fishing with his boys on the hard merchandise, and we accept that, and that was great, right? We never had an opportunity, and I think we did explore it a little, but it just never worked as good as, look, that's our story. It's Captain Dave fishing with his kids.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, those 2 boys kind of went from being co-captains to, now I go and take the boat away from them. And, I could see, they did it because we were filming and, we wanted to make good things happen. But you could see it would eat away at them.
With that said, when they're running the boat now, Joe and Jay, who's running the boat?
Well, again, see, there was always a
I don't need to
dynamic
take your
there.
questions
No,
away, but
please.
it's a good
No,
question.
I'll leave. You just do the
There's
whole thing.
always personalities, right? Because now Jay is older and has more experience with me on the boat, right? But Joe was the one who went to college, and while he was at the college, he got his captain's license, right? So, there was, by rights, Jay should be more in charge, right? But Jay didn't have his captain's license until a few years ago.
legality-wise-
And I offered to get him to pay for it, right? I said, Jay, the day you want your captain's license, I said it for him for the past decade, I'll pay for it. The boat will pay for it because he'll be a huge asset as a captain. And I ultimately paid for his course, but my son got his captain's license before Jay. So that was always a dynamic I always watched, right? And I tried to do it from the bushes. And 99% of the time, those boys worked it out just fine. But I could see there were times.
Sure.
And again, times when fishing was tough. Those boys were great for going out and catching the first fish of the season, bringing the first fish from the harbor, and they ate it right up. But just like any time we see drama, when fishing's tough,
The drama-
that's when you see that.
And again, two guys who
head
see
with-
themselves
head
as
with butt.
peers rather than
Yeah.
one being clearly older, superior,
Yeah,
etc. In all of those cases, Paul, Sandro, Jay, Joe, in all of those cases, there's got to be a time at which the student, I don't want to say the student becomes the master,
Yes.
but there's a point at which the student is ready.
Yeah.
Where they're just not a deckhand anymore.
Yeah.
They're just
Yeah.
not a mate
Not all of them.
anymore. No, I'm going to get to that part too. But in those four cases,
Yeah.
all four of those guys got to a point where it just wasn't right? They didn't want to hear it from anybody, I would think, anymore because they were capable. Do you recognize that as a captain of like, hey, this is going to get awkward here soon? It's just a matter of time.
Absolutely. You're right. You're done. And if they can't move up with you, they're going to move on.
Correct.
Of the people around Gloucester that you might take on as a deckhand or a mate, what percentage of them do you think want to be or could one day become a captain?
I think it's pretty high. If anybody, most kids that are mates, that's what they want to do. They eventually want to be a captain. That's their desire,
Right.
as was Sandro, as was Joe, as was Jay.
Especially with fishing. Look, you learn real early on, right? With fishing, it's not the type of job you hate. Look, if you've seen on the show, these guys can go out. We can work a 40-hour week. We can work an 80-hour week. We can have 200 hours on the boat and not make a paycheck because we didn't catch enough fish to make a paycheck. That's the nature of the fishing industry. You're not going to have people who don't have a passion for fishing on the boat. They're just not going to last.
But that doesn't mean they have the either ability or the wherewithal to get to the top and be a captain. Some people are maybe more comfortable taking orders from somebody else, not putting the pressure on themselves. And maybe I asked this as a way of kind of getting back to the story of Ralph and Pirate. And I don't know Pirate, and it's really hard to speculate about somebody, especially who's passed so recently. But at least the way he's presented on the show, it doesn't look like he is ever going to want to become a captain or has that in him.
Yeah.
So are there sort of pluses and minuses to having someone like that on your boat, where on one hand, they're never going to challenge you. They're never going to want to be that person. Are there some benefits to having just a worker?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's both pros
suppose.
and cons. Yeah, I mean,
there are guys like that. Yeah.
I've had crewmen on my boat that were definitely not going to be groomed to be a captain, but they still did a good job on deck. Sandro, was definitely one of the better ones. If not, Sandro was the best one that I've had, and he's groomed himself to be a captain. So I've seen both ends of it, both captain, deckhands and other deckhands that were lifetime deckhands. Both equally did a good job on deck. But at the end of the day, it's not so much how they learn or if they're going to be a captain or not. It's you got to get along.
Yeah. First mate versus deckhand, is that a promotion? Are there different roles? Or are you just kind of a nod to seniority a little bit?
That was more for the show.
Okay.
I mean,
I think so, yeah.
It was just a label. We had a captain, but if I did the show, it would have been a captain.
Just like
or two mates.
captain.
Right. So you don't have like a ceremony where you,
No.
hey, I now dub you first mate instead of being a
No, look, it's
deckhand.
a team sport, right? And even me, if you notice, all my shirts, none of my shirts say Captain Dave on them.
It's true.
I don't look at myself like that. We go out there as a team, And yeah, I'm a captain in the sense that I assume liability. And that's just pretty much as far as it goes.
Would that be different on a bigger boat? I mean, if you were
Yes.
if you were
Oh, yeah,
captain
yeah,
a
yeah.
boat with a
Without a
25
doubt.
person crew,
Without a doubt, you'd have to have that. But again, I'm confident in what we do is a small boat fishery. In my little world, it works better. The boys don't call me Captain Dave. They call me Dave, or they call me
they don't even call you Uncle Dave. Or Dad.
They call me Marciano, right? Same thing these guys call me.
Yeah.
Right?
If we were going to do the show where you came on my boat, you would have to call me Captain or Sir.
I'd say, hey, Captain Asshole, where do you want me to put this line?
I was going to say, you would have to call him Daddy, which would have been terrible.
He's your daddy.
One last part we see, and most of this episode is dedicated to the drama. I think this is my favorite episode, by the way, of this season. I really enjoy the drama, and everything Pirate and Ralph do sort of cracks me up.
It is funny.
It is funny, and it's too bad that storyline wasn't able to continue for whatever else was going on in their lives. It's really too bad, and because that's what makes you guys great. The contrast is some of the fun part of watching the show. And then they are this wild, extra, and you get some of that later. Obviously, Tyler comes in, and that brings an element of, and Paul's insanity is a part of it as well. I say that with love mostly, but
there's a good balance on the show.
But those guys, I mean, Pirate looks so ridiculous, and Ralph is just constantly yelling.
Pirate was a great character.
Isn't he?
Great character.
Isn't he just watchable?
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody loved that guy.
It's really too bad. Shout out to Pirate Man. Thanks
Absolutely.
for what he did here. There is a small moment on this episode beyond the drama. I guess it's a little drama, but it's not the interpersonal, where someone shows up right near the tuna.com and parks their boat, not just nearby, next to you, almost on top of you. You're generally, I think, pretty open and kind of let everybody do their thing out there. That seemed to set you off, though.
There's no etiquette out there at all.
Meaning there's not enough, or there shouldn't be.
It's just cutthroat out there. Now, when you're fishing in an area, just all open bottom, you don't have to anchor up. It's not a spot. We were fishing an area that day. You could anchor up anywhere. But when another boat comes and anchors right on you, as you saw, that boat anchored more than on us. An inch is as good as a mile, but there's a thing called common sense. And there was no common sense there. That was way too close. I mean, we couldn't even fish. A little swing here and there.
I paid him $25.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Googans? Is that a Googan?
No.
That was part of the fleet?
We actually became friends after that, by the way.
Really?
That's another story. But now this guy has been fishing like me. He's my age all his life, and he's a good fisherman. But as to why he did that day at the time, I just did not understand it. And yes, it did get under my skin, and that's why I erupted the way I did.
Now, on a previous episode of Real Talk, I don't want to speak out of school, and I don't want to create any extra friction. But Marciano called you a googan. I asked him to define what it meant and what a googan was, as we were talking we had Jay here, and he went through, because I had heard, hey, there's 3 different categories of people out there, right? Commercial fishermen, sport fishermen, and then the googans. And I asked if you were in the sport fisherman category, and Marciano said, no, you're just a googan. There are only 2 categories.
Well, I can't get on you about that, because you might have said that about me that one time, but 99% of the time, he has nothing but good things to say about me.
That's not been my experience, but I appreciate it. You're not a googan.
No. Absolutely. Why would I be a googan?
Well, you got to look at it in context.
A googan is a weekend warrior.
Hear me out, and I'll own up to it, Dave, right? I may have said that. In fact, I may have. But from my perspective, all right? From my perspective, my humble perspective, before I knew any of you guys, right, the 5 guys in this hobbit I could talk to, and again, I could count them on one hand, and we were commercial fishermen. And we thought all you guys over the Cape Ann Marina were the googans. Because that's it.
It's a nice, it's a nice marina.
Mm-hmm. Well, right, and no one said googans don't catch fish, but in our book, we're the guys out there fishing year-round, 300-plus days a year, hauling our gill nets, our long lines, dragging, towing the mobile gear, right? So they were just the guys over the Cape Ann Marina, right? It was different. It was so, and I'd be lying if I said that's how we didn't think about things. right? Because again, you have a cast, call it a cast system if you want, guys who do nothing but fish for a living, period. They're commercial fishermen. That's the commercial fleet. When they're not tuna fishing, even for the commercial fishermen, is an aside. It's an addition to. We really made our money, hauling gill nets for dogfish, long lining for haddock, whatever it is we did throughout the year. And, you talk about being mates, like I wasn't too proud. There was times when the ocean was closed to protect the fish that no place in range of my boat where I could fish safely was open for a few months a year while the fish is spawning. So I had no problem jumping on other boats, often much bigger boats. Whether I'm running the boat as captain or, when I was going on deck, that's like a vacation for a guy like me. You know why? Because now none of it's my responsibility. All I have to do is my job, right? Tend the net, fix the net, get the boat, whatever it is, put the fish in the hold. If we're not catching fish, it's not my fault. If the engine breaks, it's not my fault and not my problem. So we'll do anything. But again, from that context, we always thought, those guys over the Cape Ann Marina with their $1 million boats, where are all the googans? Because where were they in February and March?
Most commercial fishermen, most of them, 90% of them, besides commercial fishing, have another job. Whether it's pounding nails, cutting lawns, painting houses, doing plumbing.
Very few. No, I disagree. Well, these days, yes, we've overregulated. We went from 1,700 active commercial boats, basically when this show started, to we're less than 80 full-time commercial boats. We've destroyed the commercial fleet. That's a whole nother argument. That's a whole nother story. But at the time, again.
So if that's the definition of
right. But just because you have a tuna permit, and all of a sudden now everybody's parading around like they're a commercial fisherman. I'm sorry. I see a difference there.
I do too, but you got to admit there's a middle ground there. I think you got to admit there's a middle ground.
There is a
the
middle
more
ground.
I listen to this,
there is a middle ground.
I'm going to side with Ralph. That's right. I'm siding with Ralph. Ralph said there were 3 different types.
Well, Ralph's a googan too.
Well, but he put a type in the middle of sport fishermen.
angry googan.
Angry googan.
An angry elf googan. You got to admit there's something in between. Somebody Dave's not a weekend warrior.
No.
Right? Clearly.
No,
and if that's the definition, maybe maybe it's not his only source of income, but clearly there's got to be this sport fisherman in between. I think we've convinced you that that's real.
Sport fisherman.
All right, before you get mad.
Sport fisherman with a commercial permit. It's like the kids who dress up as firemen for Halloween.
Oh, God. Only you.
Before you get mad.com.
Go ahead.
He also said, and this is true, that he didn't know anybody on the show before the show began, but after getting to know everyone for the last 13 years now, almost 15 years, that you were the guy he feels like he's connected with the most. So despite all your differences and despite this googan barb, he's now kind of buddies with a googan.
Yeah. You are.
Yeah. No, I did say that. I said if there's anybody, I get along fine for the most part with those other guys, but I do consider you a friend.
Yes.
You feel the same way?
Yes, 100%.
I think that would surprise some people, right? Especially the way this season begins. If we flash back to episode 1 and you're like, Tricky Dave, there he comes. Oh my God, Tricky Dave's out here again. I mean, to get from there
to where we are.
Yeah, and if I had to guess, just getting to know you guys a little bit over the years, the reason for all of that, I'm going to guess, is respect.
100%.
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah. We've both been around a long time. Yep. We both helped one another when we were in need. We both broke down out there. We both towed one another in. We both shared baits, numbers, just whatever we needed to help one another out, and both in fishing and in real life things. And you know what I'm talking about.
And again, we may have got to this point through different courses. Dave made his choices in life, right? And they were certainly different than mine. I made my choice in life, and sure, maybe getting expelled from 3 or 4 high schools probably doesn't put me on plane to be, a commercial airline pilot, which I'll be the first to admit is probably a good thing. But, ultimately, those 2 diverse backgrounds, right? We did wind up in the same place, you know what I mean? Out there fishing for tuna, because that's one thing that's a common unifying thread, that universal thread that we can both agree on. We both love the same thing.
Well, speaking of respect, let me respect the limits of our time here, and we'll put a wrap on another edition of Real Talk. It's really great to be doing it again. We do have one episode left. We'll go through the finale together, the three of us as well. Please find these episodes. They're so fun. It's such a great opportunity to watch the show now on YouTube, to go back to season 1, to go beyond that, to see these guys reacting to it, almost like a director's commentary. It's a lot of fun. They're pretty funny dudes, and apparently they even have some respect for each other. Not bad. Thank you for watching another episode of Real Talk. Find it on the Wicked Tuna channel on YouTube.